Why do bad things happen to good people? And a lot of people lose their faith in a trial like that. But if you have the foundation of why you are facing these trials, then I think the spiritual fibers, they grow back and you learn from those trials and you get stronger. But unfortunately, that means the next one's coming up. Like there's going to be something.
Be ready.
And you're going to have to face it and overcome it continually to continue that growth.
Hi, I am Mike Lacey, and I'm here with Mr. John Denney. We are here with Beyond the Game, talking about BYU, the NFL, and really some awesome things that Mr. Denney and some other famous people in his household are involved in. Welcome, John. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. This is really the first time that I've interviewed someone who I really hadn't met before. So this is cool. You're from another generation of football at BYU.
Yeah, we didn't cross paths that early. And then I was in, South Florida for the last 15 years. So unless you were traveling down there, we wouldn't have seen each other.
But this young man has some experiences that are unique. And I think powerful in what we learned from life and ongoing in life. So I can't wait to talk about not only your experiences at BYU and with the Miami Dolphins, but also what he's doing in diet and nutrition now and exercise. So anyway, let's jump in. First of all, I knew you as a fan, as a long snapper. So John, tell us what a long snapper is. I don't think it's a turtle down in the southeast.
No, so was that when I was in Miami then?
This is when you were in Miami.
No one really follows, or at least at that point in football history, no one was tracking long snappers. No one was turning on the TV on the weekend to watch college long snappers.
You're right.
I'm guessing you followed BYU athletes that were playing in the NFL. So,
in fact, let me interrupt you real quick because in my career at finance, I ran into a guy. Now, this was later, and so I think I'm going back into time here. But there was a guy who worked with Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley, a compatriot of mine, but he was back on the East Coast. And he knew that I had played football. I said, Mike, you could have made bunches of money in the NFL. I don't know if you made a lot of money as a long snapper. But he said, yeah, I coach long snappers. I said, well, that's interesting. There's a market for long snappers.
There is now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a critical position. So tell us about being a long snapper.
Now, like I mentioned, it wasn't anything any kid ever grew up idolizing. It was ninth grade, junior high school. The coach just wanted to see if we could put an operation together. Like if we got in a situation, end a game, we just need like a tiny, short little field goal, win the game. Do we have, maybe a soccer player, a holder, somebody that can throw together a snap, a hold, and a kick? Because back then everyone was going for two, at least in, where I grew up.
Young, yeah.
You were going for 2 points after you scored a touchdown. So, and anyone who wanted to line up.
And for those who aren't familiar with football as much, after you score a touchdown, you can either choose to go for two, which is from the same 3-yard line, right? But you have to put it into the end zone, pass or run, and you get 2 extra points. Or easier generally is kicking an extra point where you see where the only time football becomes football is when the long snapper kicks a field goal or the extra point.
Long snapper, you snap into a holder. There's a lot of moving parts.
And that's why, think about it.
And that's why a lot of young teams aren't doing that.
Right.
You got the snap, you got the hold, you got the kick. No one's training those things. Like I mentioned, those
at
were like
those young ages
positions in football. I mean, everybody wanted to be a receiver or a quarterback, scoring touchdowns, holding the ball. Anyway, ninth grade, everyone who wanted to try, they had a tire hanging from the uprights on a chain. Go ahead, give it a shot. Let's see if we got anybody that's, could get this together. And luck, I hit the tire. I didn't lace it right through the center of the tire, but I hit the tire with a chain. There must have been like a carabiner holding the chain or something, and it hit that and knocked the chain loose, and the tire fell down. And
whoa!
Of course, everyone's like, "Oh, you knocked it." So that was like, "Oh, maybe."
And this is from the snapping position.
Yeah, this was just snapping. We were just saying if anybody could snap a ball, and so that was the catalyst for snapping in my life. It was like, "Oh, maybe I'll try snapping footballs," and that was not that wasn't my emphasis. That wasn't my focus. I was playing at that point linebacker. But it's like if in the situation. So I started working at it, just.
Let me interrupt you. Because were you ever a quarterback, or did you throw the ball on?
Baseball. I grew up playing baseball.
What position did you play in baseball?
Pitcher and shortstop.
So tell me, I remember this guy talking about the long snap, because really, if you take the ball up here when you're standing vertically, you can throw it like you would a football. And then when you bend over to be a snapper, is it generally the same motion?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, like you said, it's like a quarterback. You grab the football like you're throwing it. With your dominant hand, and then your other hand is more like a guide hand.
Like basketball,
you're coming through, snapping your wrists. If you're, there's a little bit there. So yeah, there's a drill where you snap over your head, just trying to warm up, and then you're bending over and
perfect.
Same motion through your legs.
I've seen games where critical problems between the long snapper and the holder or the punter have cost the game.
Yeah, the only way you're going to get recognition as a long snapper is in a way that you don't want it.
Just like an umpire in baseball.
Yes.
You've had a good game when nobody sees you.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that? I mean, we all want a little notoriety.
I didn't care, because I was still playing other positions where you could kind of, go get a sack, get a fumble, intercept the ball, or you could get some, a little more excitement, I guess, if you will, in the game of football. So it was something I could do. It came semi-naturally to me, and it was always secondary. So junior high school, I was the snapper. Then I got to high school, and that snapper there had just graduated, so they were in the market.
Okay.
And it was like, oh, I can kind of do this. And there was no pressure, because it wasn't what I was working. It wasn't my thing, but it's like I was good enough at it. I was the best of the worst. So it was my job. So that was just the whole process.
What a great experience.
Same thing on to college.
Interesting.
I get to college, snappers graduating.
A long snapper.
They need a guy. And it was always a position. So when I grew up, it was a position player that snapped a football. Nobody was a designated long snapper. You didn't grow up going to camps. You weren't training for it. They weren't offering scholarships to snappers. There was no incentive to become a long snapper. You needed to be a good tight end or a linebacker or a D end, kind of one of those mid-sized guys that could figure out how to snap a ball. And that worked out right into my.
Tell me what the difference is when you're snapping for an extra point or a field goal. That's significantly different than snapping to a punter.
It is.
Is that a hard difference?
It's just more finesse. It's more arms and wrist. The emphasis is on the rotations of the ball.
Okay.
You want to get it so that the holder, when he catches it, he's catching laces right in his fingers.
Wow, really?
So he catches it here, and then the ball comes down, and he doesn't have to spin the ball. It's a quicker operation. It's smoother. So you got to figure out.
You get it down to that minute detail.
You do it enough, yeah. That you 3.5 rotations for me, and and you just work at muscle memory. And so that's more of a finesse, because you don't want to hum that thing back there. You're not ripping.
No, you can't.
A short snap.
He's 7 yards behind you.
You gotta make it. You want it quick,
right?
But you want him to be able to keep it a smooth operation. You don't want him, getting spooked every time you snap. And then now with the punt is different. You're humming that thing back there.
You're humming it,
and that's 15 yards.
Timing's important.
It's twice as far.
That's right. It's higher too,
and it's it's higher. Your shooting locations change because your punter can offset, depending on whether he's trying to punt right, whether he's trying to punt left. So he can kind of shade you one way or the other. And if he's right-footed, you're trying to put it on his right hip. And if he's left-footed, you're trying to put it on his left hip, because that's where he's catching, and that's where his drop's coming out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at a professional level.
I can tell you were a pitcher, because when you're putting it on one hip or the other from the snapping position, I mean, I'd be lucky to hit the broadside of a barn.
Yeah. That's the ultimate goal. I mean, that's at the professional level we're talking. In college, it wasn't like that. They were just like, if you can get it within the arm's reach of the punter, that was fantastic. It's evolved. It's really changed. And these college snappers nowadays, they are at that level.
They're more like the pros.
Yeah.
And yet, it seems to me that I saw, no, this was a line of scrimmage play. What do you call it when you're snapping back to the quarterback?
Shotgun?
A shotgun.
Yeah.
He was in shotgun position. And one of the snappers, I think it was a second team guy because the first team center got injured. One of the bowl games, he hit himself, and the ball fumbled out towards the quarterback, and it was an interesting play.
Yeah, no, I don't want to be part of that.
No, you don't ever want to be part of that.
Short-term memory on those.
John Denney, as I read through your history, was one of the longest tenured players with the Miami Dolphins. In fact, what I read, you signed as an unsigned free agent, and then started that first year, and I think you went at least 16 more years, if not more.
I spent 14 years with Miami, and then I went one more season during the playoffs when the Saints were making a run in the playoffs the following year.
Oh,
my special teams coach from Miami was then at the Saints. It was during COVID.
Was Taysom Hill? Okay, so Taysom Hill was there.
So yeah, no, long story. COVID situation. The onboarding process took a week. So if their snapper got a sniffle on Monday, they couldn't get a new snapper in fast enough because you had to go sit in a hotel for 6 days and test negative on COVID before you were allowed to practice or play with the team. So my special teams, I can't say I really played with the Saints that 15th. He was like, hey, I need a guy that's cleared protocols, that's ready to go. Because if our guy tests negative or positive, then we need you already cleared.
Yeah.
So I stepped in during the playoffs when they were making a playoff because you don't want to get caught during the playoffs with no snapper. That's
Drew Brees. Was that Drew Brees?
Yeah.
Cool. That was a fun team to watch.
Yeah. So it was really, 14 full seasons with the Dolphins. And yeah, I was lucky enough to be there long enough to get a record of most consecutive games played.
I saw that. Yeah. And I think there was 1 year where you had surgery on an arm and an injury that you...
Yeah, early, either my second, I want to say it was my second year.
Okay.
They just cleaned out my elbow. They scoped my elbow, had some...
Was that your right arm or left?
It was my right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when I talked to this guy who was a coach for long snappers, it was, I think, it was during the period you were in the NFL, but he was saying that the long snapper was usually more protected, that in the NFL, and I think even in the NCAA, they started protecting, because I remember playing high school ball that my coaches would say, well, that the snapper, he's got his head down, he's the most vulnerable of all the guys. And so if you want to create havoc and maybe get a bad snap, you hit him.
Yeah. And
so tell me the differences. I mean, it's way easy being a long snapper, right? Because they protect you.
It is now. My first couple years, there was no protections. And like you said, they gamed that weakness. They would look for the weakness. Bill Belichick, they get their biggest guy, Vince Wilfork, put him right on top of you, and as soon as the ball moves, they're just
he's pounding
balling you up and rolling you backwards. And that was, you were just told to die a slow death. You're going to get destroyed, but just do it as slow as possible. We just need, 1.3 seconds to get this ball off. So that's how it started my first couple of years. But then there was this focus on health, player safety, CTE kind of hit the scene.
True.
And so the NFL was trying to do more to protect guys in vulnerable positions. And so they started, it seemed like a year at a time they were adding a little bit. So they couldn't line up right on top of you anymore. They made it so you had to start outside his framework.
So he could still slant into you, but he's not hitting you head on.
Right. It just gives the snapper time to protect himself. On the field goals, it's kind of developed to even more protection. I mean, they can't hit you at any part in your head or neck. Even after, they start outside your framework, they can't come in and hit you in your head or neck area. So on a field,
if they do, it's what, a 15 or?
Yeah, it's changed some games.
Okay, good. Interesting.
Yeah. So,
but you weren't in that era.
Not at first. No, I lived throughout the whole progression. And they had the same thing on punts, where they had to start outside of you, but they could still fire off into you. And with punting was different because you have to block and then you got to cover. The field goal's so quick.
When he talks about cover, that means the coverage team on a punt has to go down and tackle the guy who's caught the punt. So it's critical that all 11 guys, even the punter sometimes is the last resort for tackling that guy. We talked to Lee Johnson a couple of weeks ago, and Lee was telling the story in a Super Bowl. He had the record for the longest punt, and that's all I read. And then he said, but Mike, you didn't hear the rest of the story. And it was against the 49ers. I forget now who the famous receiver for the 49ers had the longest return ever in the NFL or in the Super Bowl, returning Lee's longest punt ever.
Yeah.
So coverage is when you go down and you tackle the guy who catches the punt.
Yeah. So that, as far as punts went, just as I'm getting back to when you were saying, and now it's super easy, like these kids are protected. Yeah.
Nothing super
easy. At the
easy
same time, well, I would say on field goals, there's a ton of protection where you're not worried about anything else besides your snap.
Get the snap.
Because you do have those protections. On punt, you still have to get up and you gotta slide step, right or left. You gotta, read the scheme. You gotta block a guy. There's a call where you are responsible for one of these rushers. So you still have this responsibility. So I've seen actually, the last handful of years in my career where they were bringing in rookies during training camp. These kids were all good snappers, but they all failed to block. Because in college, it was just, you had all day, no one was rushing you. A lot of the punt formations were spread out real wide, and the snapper could just snap, take as much time as he wanted. He could follow through as long as he wanted, and no one was going to hit him, and then he could go cover it. In the NFL, you got a guy coming into you, and if you don't block him, he's blocking the kick.
That's right.
Being able to get these kids to have a quick release and then take care of their blocking responsibility, I saw messed up a lot. A lot of these young kids coming in turned from great snappers into mediocre snappers, which allowed me to steal, a couple more years at that back into my career.
Good for you. Lee Johnson told us that that's the big difference between the NCAA and the NFL is, in the NFL, he can't sit back there and hold the ball forever because you guys can't release until he's punted. Yeah. Whereas in the NCAA, he can take forever. That's how these Australian or end over end kickers.
Some of them roll out and do like Aussie style ball.
Right.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't work in the NFL.
No, it hasn't.
And you can't hang the ball up when you're or punting end over end like the Aussie guys. Or I don't think you can.
No, it's when you have these going in punts, and when I say going in, like when you're at the midfield going into the end zone.
And you're angling in to try to get at the 5-yard line.
Punters now are kicking these nose down ball, they drop the ball with the nose down, and they're kicking them end over end reverse.
But at an angle.
At an angle, so that, if it hits the ground, it'll hopefully check back instead of roll forward. So they've the game's evolved as far as that goes. But if you got a full field to work with, they're not doing those end over end punts. It's an art. Like some of these punters in the NFL have figured out how to do some of these Aussie style, kind of read the defense, kick away, line up one way to get the returner lined up, and then last second
away
switch and hit like an Aussie style roller that's hard to field. When the ball's on the ground bouncing around and this guy's coming, he's trying to flip fields because you had him on the other side.
It makes it a mess.
There's a lot going on the field and schematically than people realize. That there's more. It's not just a lot of people just see these idiots out there banging their heads against each other, but there is a lot of strategy and gaming going on, even at the special teams level.
Especially. Did you ever run into Gary Zahner?
No, not personally, but he is one of the top go-to guys for specialists, for punters, kickers, and snappers. Him and Rubio is another guy that if you look at it, Google snapping camps or coaches, they're top of the list.
It's interesting, John. When I was at BYU, it was in the earlier years of Lavelle Edwards, and we were just making our way into the national prominence. We had a coaching staff that was unbelievable. Lavelle, then you had Fred Whittingham at defensive coordinator, guys like Doug Scoville or Ted Tollner, even Mike Holmgren as offensive coordinators. I mean, it felt like when we look back at it, we had some of the best coaches in the country.
Yeah.
And you went into a different era. Do you want to share? I mean, our era, everything was growing.
I don't know, for whatever reason, my entire career, I was part of not great teams. High school, like, we were winning games. College, didn't win. Well, okay, I skipped Rick's. I spent 1 year in Rexburg, Idaho, and we did take home the real Dairy Bowl trophy down in Pocatello,
Which is a big deal.
So that might have been the apex of my success with the team. But yeah, I came to BYU, and I overlapped with my brother, Gary Croton's first year, and that was a phenomenal year. They did, that was the Doman.
You had 2 losses, but Staley broke his ankle.
It was
right?
the Hawaii game.
Oh,
but that
my
was
heavens.
so it was. They were starting off hot.
That was an exciting year.
For whatever reason, that I redshirted that year, so I wasn't playing. I'm watching, but then the next couple of years we didn't have winning years. We didn't even qualify for a bowl bid my whole career.
Tell me about that. Certainly when you signed to go to BYU, that wasn't your expectation, I'm sure.
No, I got a taste of it my redshirt year, but you're not playing, so it's kind of like you get to participate. But
did you get a participant's trophy?
Yeah, you get to go on the trip, and you get the swag bag and the freebies, and so that's fun. And you're looking forward to your years when you're playing, and yeah.
So at BYU, you played defensive end.
Yeah.
Now, you were telling me earlier that in high school, because your school didn't have the size, they not converted, but they always played you as offensive lineman.
Yeah, I wanted to play defense, but they put me over, said, we need you on the offensive line. You're a bigger body. And I did it, and I was filling a void, and I didn't love it. It wasn't my passion, and got few looks, from D1 colleges coming out of high school. Ended up in Rick's. They offered me, a late scholarship, and even then, I was coming up that was an offensive line offer. And when I got to Rick's, they were short on the defensive scout team, and that's where my passion was. I wanted to play defense.
Now, your brother Ryan was a defensive end the whole time, right?
Yeah, he was.
So why'd they throw you on the
and
offensive line?
He even played both ways in high school.
Oh,
which they wouldn't let me do. He had a different head coach.
Oh,
that had retired by the time I became a senior. And I asked him, let me play defense. They said, no, we need guys fresh. We only want you going one way. And I asked him every week after every game, I was like, Coach, this is like, just let me.
Wish I would have been your coach.
I'll play offense. I'll play the offensive line position, but let me play some defense. And they wouldn't let me do it. So I got a JUCO offer up in Idaho, spent 1 semester there, and they didn't have any guys playing Scout D. They needed bodies. And I was like 4th or 5th string offensive line.
So without much experience at defensive line, you said
none. I had 1 year in 9th grade as a linebacker, as far as defensive experience. And I was like, I'll play Scout.
Wow.
Let me play Scout D. Sign me up. Like, I know I got no chance at playing on the field, but I'm not as a 4th string offensive lineman. That wasn't. I'm
for those
freshman.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Scout D is the team that plays against the first team offense to prepare for this next week's opposition. So the Scout team they're
mimicking the opponent's defense.
The opponent's defense.
They got cards drawn up. They show you a card. You huddle up. They show you a card. You look at your position and your responsibility.
So you were playing Scout D.
You're running the other team's stuff. But I was like, that sounds way more fun to me. And I did that well enough as a freshman before my mission, that when I came back so I just played 1 semester there, gray shirted, so I wasn't even eligible to play. Went on a mission, came back. When I came back, the coaches knew me as a defensive player because I'd been running scout, the year before. I was playing scout defense, and so I kind of slipped right in as a defensive player and did, I got the first, the starting job. And
is that the year you went to the Dairy Bowl?
That was, yeah. We won the real Dairy Bowl.
That's cool. Where is the real Dairy Bowl?
Pocatello, Idaho.
Wow.
I think, what was that? ISU?
Do you
Idaho
remember
State University.
Who did you beat? Who did you play?
I don't even remember.
That's fine. No problem.
No, but that was, and then so I did well enough my first year as a defensive end to get an offer to transfer to BYU, and that's how I ended up the rest of my career at BYU.
So you at BYU, you played defensive end, and you also helped out with long snapper. Any other positions?
Kick, actually.
You were a kicker.
I was the backup kicker.
Wow.
So I grew up playing, like I'd mentioned to you, I grew up playing soccer, baseball, and basketball. I didn't start playing football until 9th grade. And so, I had some type of kicking experience, if you will.
So you were
from
a soccer style kicker.
So Matt Payne was our punter and kicker. But, when we ran, second team kickoff, I was, during practice, I was kicking those. Now, obviously, you run into a small problem when your snapper is your backup kicker. You're going to need another snapper.
That's right.
Luckily, it never came to that. But, yeah.
That is really interesting. Tell us then, because you had that first year, your redshirt year at BYU, and then things slipped away. And I remember as a fan how difficult it was to, and I could have my opinions. Dang, something's wrong. Did you have an opinion or anything that you learned from your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, you can be doing all the right things and you still can't, determine the outcome in your favor every time. Because we were working like crazy. We had, Bronco Mendenhall was our defensive coordinator. And, I mean, he trained us into the ground. I mean, literally, that was one of the worst things at practices was running the conditioning drill, pursuit drill, where they, throw the football to a receiver down the sideline. He takes off running down the sideline, and the whole defense has got to pursue, chase him down. While doing this, he's blowing his whistle, and you're doing up downs, but you're running full speed, and then he blows his whistle, and you're diving on the ground and trying to jump up, and tops of everyone's knees are bloodied, but we ran and we conditioned and we put in, a lot of work. So you sit there and you're like, man, it's not for lack of effort.
No.
Sometimes you just.
No, and Bronco Mendenhall, we lived in New Mexico for a while. So he was with, Rocky Long in New Mexico. And they were known for running tough and disciplined defenses.
Very disciplined.
And Bronco, it seemed to me that he always had the respect of at least a majority of his team.
Yeah.
But your knees were bloodied.
Yeah. After your first couple of practices, you started to figure out that you got to double up on the knee pads, or, get an extra sleeve under your pants.
But nowadays, these players are going with their almost as if they're wearing shorts with no knee pads. How do you do that?
Technically it's against the rules, but a lot of these kids, they're all
basketball.
They're all worried about their style and their swag. And if they spend as much time on how they dressed as they did in their practicing and training, they would be.
I was a fullback and a tight end, and I was a relatively tall fullback, so my knees had to be covered because I was always getting hit in the knees, but not always, but sometimes.
That's an aiming point for sure for a defensive player.
It was, especially if you're a bigger fullback.
Yeah.
I know that you were famous because you played in the NFL for that many years, and you did pretty well there. I'm proud of how good that life was for you. But I understand that in your household there might be someone even more famous. Can you share?
Especially here in Utah, it seems like she gets recognized.
Tell me about
more so in public than I would.
I looked up Christy, and the name of her blog is "The Girl Who Ate Everything." That's wow. Who wouldn't like that? Tell me about what Christy does.
Well, she runs a full-blown corporation at this point, and it started off as a hobby. She never had any intentions of creating a business. She was a computer science major, and she was just going to consolidate family recipes, friends recipes, family recipes. Hey, everybody just give me your stuff, and I'm going to consolidate it and digitize it, and I'm going to throw it on a website so everyone has access to it. Just make it easier for everybody. Because back then you were kind of like, hey, do you have that recipe card? Can you write that or email me? So that's how it started off, and it slowly just started to gain traction, just word of mouth, friends and family. And she kind of got in before that was even a thing. Blogspot was a thing back then.
Right.
But food blogging was not an industry. There was no money
So
there.
she was avant-garde, and
She luckily just kind of fell into it.
yeah.
And that helps with like your Google score, and it gives you more clout. And because she's been around longer, she gets a little, a higher rating. But that's how it started off, and it started to gain traction. And I was teasing her like, hey, you should I've heard you can make money. Like if you put advertisements on your website, you can make a couple bucks. And she was like, she was resistant. She was like,
Was she not in it for the money?
She wasn't. It had nothing. That was never her. She's like, no, it's just like, she felt like a sellout. She's like, I'm not going to, that's not why I made it. I don't want to be making money off of, people's recipes.
Interesting.
And, but over time, she was like, started to develop enough traffic that she was toying around with the idea, and she reached out to a marketing company, and signed a deal with them, and they started advertising on her website. And it was slow and go, at the beginning, a couple $100 a month. And then, she started getting into a little more. She started to teach herself photography, food photography specifically. She had that computer science background, so she's, she can write up in all the recipes and post them on her website. And she developed and just started taking off, and it got exponentially bigger and bigger. And it's now, she's the one bringing home the bacon.
And you're watching the kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I did read one thing, though. Now, in the Deseret News, I think in 2021 or so, there was an article about you both, and it kind of focused really on this business of hers, the girl who ate everything. But you guys did say that the recipes that were making the biggest impact, or the people liked the most, were ones that you added. Why is that?
Low carb.
Really?
Seemed to be really trendy. A lot of people are going, whether it be, ketogenic or carnivore, just getting rid of the processed grain. But it was timing of it. So in the off season, so this is a long story. I don't know how much time you got. Every off season I would cut.
We all need to get a little more fit. So I'm totally listener.
I would cut down weight. I would play around, 255. That's what they wanted me at.
6'5", 255, long snapper.
Yeah, but
that's big enough to play some other positions on the team.
It is. I peaked out at 280. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I hit my first week in the NFL, first couple weeks in the NFL. You go from starving college student to, 7 meals a day, full spread. And as a college student, you're going to eat like it's your last meal, because that's kind of how you ate in college. You didn't know where your next meal was coming from, and it was going to be ramen or hot dogs, but now you have this full smorgasbord. So I jumped up 10 pounds quick, and I hit 280. And anyway, I was like, okay, that might be too much. And then I started snapping. I was trying to make it as a defensive end and or snapper. And once I locked up the position of snapping, I didn't need to be carrying around that excess weight. And when I lost weight, I felt better. So I got down to 255, and the joints felt better, and I just felt better overall. And so in the off season, I would cut down to 230. I'd drop 20, 25 pounds.
For what reason?
Just because I felt better.
Playing sports too, or
no?
You just felt better.
It was less pressure on my joints and less inflammation. Just felt better. And so, it was probably 5 years ago. One off season, I was like, hey, this ketogenic diet is I've heard a lot about it, but I didn't know anything about it.
Ketogenic, the only thing I know is that it allows fats.
Yeah, it's a high fat diet. You're 70% fat, 20% protein, and the rest carbohydrates. You're sub 30, 40 grams of carbohydrates every day. Anyway, I was curious about it, and I'll try something different this off season, do nothing about it. And I started reading about this ketogenic diet, and I started trying it. And my wife, she's running this company, and she's writing cookbooks, and she's always developing recipes. So it kind of went great. It was hand in hand. I was like, I was over here on the side, cooking up my own low carb recipes. And she's like, we might as well throw these on the website.
Sure.
And it was perfect. And I learned about it, and I started feeling better, even, more so. Inflammation and chronic tendonitis that I had in my hip was going away. things that I just thought and attributed to old age. Like, oh, I'm getting older. These are those.
Here's a guy in his 40s talking about old age. Come on now.
It's like dog years. I mean, in the NFL, playing at the age of 40 was, you were an old man.
When I met John, this guy's an intimidating guy. Not only is he tall, but the guy's really fit. All right, so you eat well. That's obvious. And I mean properly. You eat properly. What's your routine for exercise? What do you do? And do you coach? Are you more of a trainer or just into it?
No, I've done a little bit of everything. As far as coaching goes, I do coach kids that are still snapping. I'm not running a clinic on the weekly. Right. It's word of mouth. It's friends and family that are always, but it's enough that people are reaching out to me. Hey, I have this nephew. I have this friend. They're graduating, or they're going into college, or they're graduating college and trying to play in the NFL, and they snap. Just, can you work with them? So I do coach that, and then I coach also nutrition and training.
So are you into bicycling, running, lifting weights, any out?
Personally, I like some resistance training, so weights, but combine that with something just to keep you moving. Do what you're going to do. Do what you like.
Now, my wife's playing tennis with your wife. Are you a tennis player?
Because my wife just started, I've been playing with her. I'm not in a league. I'm not at that level, but I do enjoy playing with her. But so yeah, whatever it is you like doing, hiking, biking, swimming, just be active, move around. But also you do want to pair that with some resistance training.
Especially, I've found the older I get, if I don't lift weights, that's when my joints start. No,
there's a correlation to longevity and muscle mass.
It's a big deal.
And a lot of people are like, oh, you're a meathead. I'm not, the gym rat. I'm not talking about training
or resistance training. Right.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be bodybuilding or Olympic lifting. But you do need some resistance training. You want to maintain somewhat of a muscle mass, because once you start slipping, it's a domino effect. Once you have less muscle, you want to move less. And the less you move, the less muscle you have. I mean, eventually you get to a point where you're sedentary, and that's
I don't want to call it the toilet bowl spiral, but
yeah, it's a slippery slope to the grave, Yeah. So you want to maintain,
stay busy
and I have no certifications, I'm not a professional in that aspect, but I've read a ton. I can tell you my own personal experience with the foods I've eaten, how I've trained, how I feel doing different things. And I've worked with other people because of my own experience, and I've seen their success. So I can tell you my own personal successes and successes I've had with other people, getting rid of these foods, these insulin spiking foods.
Earlier, you shared with me a wonderful metaphor, and it kind of jives with where you're going here. Your experience at BYU was very interesting and very, not contrary, but almost the opposite side of the coin from my experience, where I was in at the earliest years of Coach Edwards, and you were there at after in the transition. And your experience at BYU was, I think you said, you used a metaphor about adversity and, when we have things in our lives that are oppositional.
Yeah.
And how so your friend had opposition in his body, this diabetes. And can you compare or even contrast, what you learned in your experience from BYU or these other things in life and how they make us maybe better people?
Yeah. So since I've spent, the majority of my life in an environment where I'm training, in the gym, I've drawn a lot of metaphors from that. They say all things testify of Christ, and that's like my environment was the weight room, and so I started to see all these analogies. And I was telling you how I kind of you associate trials as resistance. If you're lifting weights, you need to put weight on the bar that's difficult to lift, like difficult enough that you're going to strain and it's going to physically tear down the muscle fibers in your body. And when you pair that with proper nutrition, those muscles build back even stronger. And you do it over and over and over. It's repetitive. Same things.
That's how we grow. That's how we develop.
So I think, I see that with life and with the trials we face in life. You have to face some resistance. You have to face some trials. You have to put weight on this bar. We don't want to. I mean, everyone would just
sit on the couch.
Yeah. No one wants to face trials. No one looks for trials. But you need them. You need those trials, but you also need to be pairing those trials with proper nutrition. Feasting upon the words of Christ, being, reading the conference talks, reading the words of our prophets. Those words and the words in the scriptures, that's that nutrition, that spiritual nutrition that's required with that trial that will make you stronger. Now, if you don't have that eternal perspective, or that, if you're not thinking celestially, as the prophet says, then you're going to that trial is going to bury you. And it's going to be, why would God do this to me?
And why
do bad things happen to good people? And a lot of people lose their faith in a trial like that. But if you have the foundation of why you are facing these trials
and sticking in and continuing,
then I think the spiritual fibers, they grow back, and you learn from those trials and you get stronger. But unfortunately, that means the next one's coming up. Like, there's going to be something.
Be ready.
And you're going to have to face it and overcome it continually to continue that growth, I think.
And even maybe institutionally that happens. Because, my experience coming in as a freshman football player at BYU versus yours were dramatically different. And yet some of the same growth lessons were learned in maybe opposite ways. So, John Denney, what a wonderful lesson. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and what you've done. We love that you and your wife are doing the girl who ate everything, and that you're training and helping other people develop. Thank you for all you're doing.
You're welcome.
And thanks for showing up for Beyond the Game.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me.